Eldritch Soup for your soul. What's going on, everyone? This is Eldritch Soup for your soul with another episode of Eldritch Soup Talks. And on this episode, we will be diving into the music of Erich Zann by H.P. Lovecraft. This is another one of my sleeper favorite stories by the author, just because the person that's diving into this forbidden power or knowledge isn't doing so for personal gain. They're really only doing it to protect themselves / others around them, which is quite rare for the mythos. Another good example of this would be Cool Air, which I did the narration and podcast about a month back. But let's dive into some logistics. The story was written by Lovecraft in 1921 and later published in March of 1922 in National Amateur. Now, what's unique about the music of Erich Zann is how Lovecraft himself viewed the story. Lovecraft was very hypercritical of his work and really didn't like most of the stories that he wrote, with the music of Erich Zann being one of the exceptions. Not only did Lovecraft himself like the work, it was also anthologized during his lifetime. Featured in not only Dashiell Hammett's 1931 Creeps by Night collection, but also being featured in Ramsey Campbell's Folio Book of Horror Stories. But without further ado, let's TLDR the story so people know what we're talking about. The story focuses around an unnamed narrator who is a student at the local university. He's looking for cheap and affordable housing, which brings him in contact with the Rue d'Orsay. The building is close to the university and is described as being almost on a cliff. It's on a steep incline of a hill, and it's surrounded by dark warehouses and a wall, with the only viewpoint over the wall being a single window on the top floor. There are very few tenants in the building besides the narrator, the landlord, and of course, a musician named Erich Zann. Erich Zann is described to be an elderly man who is mute and plays the viol at a local orchestra. The old man has secrets of his own because during the night, in fact all night, the student will hear very, very strange melodies coming from the old man's room. Eventually the student does approach Zann and asks if he can play him some music. Zann, who is also described as being very, very reclusive, does invite him back to his room to play. Upon entering the room, the student does make a remark that the room almost looks abandoned, like no one truly lives in it. It's very untidy, there's no real furniture, and there's just paper strewn about. Zann then plays his viol for the student, but just plays the music from the orchestra. He doesn't get into any of the strange melodies. The student then asks about the melodies and even hums them to Zann. This makes Zann extremely nervous and paranoid, and he looks over to the window that overlooks the wall, which has a curtain that blocks his view. When the student tries to go and look out the window, Zann becomes aggressive and pulls him back. He even goes as far as to ask the narrator to actually change rooms so he can no longer hear that music at night. The narrator is taken back by this display of behavior, but kind of just chucks it up to the fact that he's an old man and probably suffers from nervous disorders. Zann then again becomes calm, appreciates the student for listening to his music and invites him back to listen whenever he pleases. The only caveat being that he will never play that strange music for the narrator. After this encounter, however, Zann becomes more and more reclusive, eventually just shutting his door to the student, totally not letting him listen at all. This only fuels the curiosity of the student further, and he begins to eavesdrop on Zann during the night. One night, while Zann is playing this strange music, the narrator is listening right outside his door and hears the old man scream. The student begins banging on the door, and Zann actually lets him in. Now, don't forget that Zann is mute. So when the student enters the room, Zann writes on a notepad, give him some time, but he's going to write down and explain everything to him. About an hour goes by when the narrator hears this deep, distant sound coming from beyond the window. This causes Zann to immediately stop writing and then frantically play his viol. He describes Zann's music as being absolutely horrific, and kind of comes to the conclusion that the music is either designed to drown out the note he heard or to keep something out of the room. When he looks back at Erich Zann, he appears to be in a catatonic state, however his body is still wildly playing the music. It's at this moment where that noise the narrator hears outside takes on a more mocking tone, and a gust of wind shatters the glass to the window. The notes that Zann wrote explaining everything start flying all over the place, and the student desperately tries to pick them up. The papers are then sucked out of the window, and then the student's curiosity of what lies beyond the window begins to take over. Instead of seeing the lights of the city, the narrator only sees the blackness of the void, described as terrible, infinite abyss of chaos. While this is happening, between the music of Zann as well as the howling wind, all the candles in the room get blown out and they are left in complete darkness. While blindly trying to navigate the room, the narrator feels a quote unquote chill thing brush up against him. This is his breaking point, and he attempts to find Zann in the darkness and escape. He does find Zann and scream for him to run, but Zann is just furiously playing the music unending. When he attempts to physically remove Zann from the chair and drag him out, he discovers that Zann is dead, but his body is still playing the music. The student then bolts out of the room, out of the Rue d'Orsay, and then completely out of the neighborhood. When he turns back to the neighborhood, he notices there is no storm, there is no darkness. The city lights are on and shining as they should be, and the sky is completely quiet. The story then concludes with the narrator saying that these events had happened years earlier and he's just recalling the memory. The final horror 1-2 punch of the story is that to this day, the narrator has never met someone who lived at the Rue d'Orsay, nor has any memory of it. He has never been able to find the building, the street, the neighborhood, and when he looks on maps of the area, it appears nowhere. Despite the fact that the Rue d'Orsay can never be found, the narrator does feel a sense of relief. That not only is this portal to infinite chaos gone, but as well as the papers that describe the music of Erich Zann. Even though the music of Erich Zann is not as well known as the other Lovecraft stories, this still is in my top 10. Mainly because it perfectly captures the classical definition of Eldritch. That definition being something that is mysterious as well as sinister. So in layman's terms, something you come in contact with that you know is dark, bad, or evil, but you can't really look away, or your curiosity just gets the better of you. Which is what exactly happens to the narrator as well as if you were thrown into that story. One thing that I like about Lovecraftian horror is it decompartmentalizes people's theories or ideas about horror or horror situations. People tend to think that when thrown into a horror situation that you would keep your cool, you'd make all the right or rational choices, and that you would end up surviving in the end. In Lovecraftian horror, however, the narrators either meet their demise, unalive themselves, or become so physically and emotionally damaged that they are scarred for life. And the narrator of the music of Erich Zann fits that category, which is no fault of his own. Put in that exact situation, 99.9% of people would make the same choices that the narrator made throughout the entire story. Even starting with the beginning, if you're a student in college or just starting out with work, you're gonna look for the most affordable housing. Doesn't matter if it's in a sketchy part of town, a sketchy street or neighborhood, or even the building just creeps you out, money talks, and if it's the only thing you can afford, then that's where you're living. Now, what I will say is the difference of the times. This story was written in 1922, and I think that most people would be very intrigued by their neighbors and go around introducing themselves. With it being 2024, I do think that most people would probably keep to themselves and be very, very introverted. However, the story does state that there are really no other tenants besides the narrator, Zann, and the landlord, so I think eventually they would meet and talk with each other. Now comes the discussion about the music. Personally, if I woke up in the middle of the night and heard my upstairs neighbor playing this very strange music, I would be inclined to hear more about it or ask him about it. Because why wouldn't you? I would say most, if not all people, if they heard a new band or a new form of music, especially if it's exotic, they don't just go, oh, that's nice, and move on, hope they hear it again on the radio. They kind of dive into researching it, researching the band, and see if they can find the music. Now teleport back 100 years to the 1920s when, access to music wasn't as easily available as it is today. It's 100% believable that anybody, when discovering something new, would go and investigate the musician. And this is where things take an eldritch turn. Because when the narrator is invited into Zann's room and sees the state that it's in, one would easily deduce that something is not mentally well with Zann. Most people keep an orderly house, some kind of cleanliness, some kind of furniture organization. Especially a person like Zann, who is like a professional musician, you think he would conduct his life very orderly. But his apartment is described as almost looking abandoned, lacking any form of kind of warmth or human touch or any organization. But the curiosity of the narrator pushes him through this first red flag. Now, what I would use to justify someone doing this would be the same concept behind if you were to ever break into like a haunted house or a graveyard or something like that. Your curiosity is going to push you past the initial feelings of this graveyard is creepy, this building is decrepit, this building is going to implode on us. You're drawn in because you want to see something supernatural, even though if you did see something supernatural, you'd probably tuck tail and run. But it's enough curiosity to push you past that initial hesitation. So the narrator stays and listens to Zann play some music. However, when he begins to ask about the strange melodies and even hum them, Zann has a noticeable change in behavior. The song triggered something in Zann, and it obviously triggered nothing good. So much so that Zann just instinctively looked at the window overlooking the wall that was covered by a curtain. This is when the narrator gets up to walk over to the window, and then Zann becomes physically aggressive with him. And again, this is something I believe everyone would do. The narrator makes it a point to state that the only window overlooking the wall into the city belongs to Zann's room. So now that the character is in the apartment, why wouldn't he make an attempt to look out the window? There's nothing abnormal about that. Add in the fact that when the strange melody is brought up, Zann gives a terrified look at the window as if something were to come out. This would only drive your curiosity of what lies beyond the window even further. Your curiosity would hit an apex level when Zann became aggressive and then physically tried to remove you from the window or from viewing beyond the window, which is exactly what happens with the narrator. As Zann becomes more reclusive, the character becomes more obsessed with the melody, to the point where the narrator is now eavesdropping during the night to listen to the music outside his door. Then everything comes to a head the night that the narrator hears Zann scream. Now, I would say in 2024, if most people heard someone scream during the night, I don't think they would leave the safety of their own apartment or house to go investigate. But this is 1921, 1922, where people had a much stronger bond with their friends, family, and neighbors, so the neighbor bangs on Zann's door and Zann lets him in. Now, while it's not stated, I genuinely believe that the appearance of Zann at this point is someone who is in a full-blown manic episode. So why does Zann agree to let the neighbor in and explain everything in detail to him? In my opinion, I think Zann knew that this would be his final show, his final playing of the music. Obviously, we find out later that Zann dies while playing the music in an attempt to fight it back, so I do think that Zann knew that he would not survive this last encounter. This goes on for about an hour until the narrator / Zann hears this deep, distant note from beyond the window. How I envisioned this sound was like the same sound made by the footsteps of the T-Rex in Jurassic Park. It's a deep, deep sound that sends like chills down your spine. It's some distance away, but you know it's close and getting closer to you. Upon hearing this sound, Erich Zann immediately drops what he's doing and begins to frantically play. The narrator then goes on to describe his playing as frantic, and the music is terrifying, but he gets the gist that it's designed to either drown out the sound from outside or to keep something from coming in. And I think it's at this moment the narrator finally starts piecing things together. He doesn't know what, but something bad is about to happen. The sound outside then takes a mocking tone, and a huge gust of wind then blasts the window wide open, to which the narrator and Zann are then assaulted by turbulent winds. The narrator naturally tries to hold on to the papers that Zann wrote, because obviously this is his explanation of everything that's happening. However, this unnatural wind sucks the papers out of the window, and then this is when the narrator's curiosity of what lies beyond truly takes over. Kind of like a moth to flame, the student is unable to resist the urge to look out the window. At this point, I believe that most people would compartmentalize their role in the story and kind of take the viewpoint that, oh yeah, I wouldn't look out the window, I would just run, which I would call BS. Same thing with like the haunted house analogy or a haunted graveyard. You're there to see something supernatural. If something strange or abnormal were to occur, obviously people who are frightened very easily would tuck tail and run. But if you're there to see something supernatural, you're going to press on and investigate no matter how many red flags there are. So is the narrator crazy for looking out the window with all these events happening? Yes. Because what kind of wind intentionally breaks down a window to suck out some papers? But would most people be stupid enough to look out that window? Yes, me included. And what does the narrator see when he looks out that window? He sees the black void of space. Not pretty space, look at the stars, I wish I was an astronaut. It's described as the terrible black void, an infinite abyss of chaos. While we don't know exactly what he's looking at, meaning that we don't know if this is a cosmic entity, like a cosmic horror, or the domain of a cosmic entity, we sure as hell know he's just not looking at empty space. It is during a moment like this that I would remind people this is the moment in Call of Cthulhu tabletop game where you would roll for sanity. This isn't a moment where you just look at this entity and go, well, that's scary, and then you can act rationally and run away or rescue Zann. You're staring at something that is beyond human comprehension. A pure cosmic horror that can shatter your sanity where you stand. And kind of like a deer in headlights, the narrator just sits there staring until the candles get blown out. This, I believe, snaps him temporarily back to reality, and he realizes that he needs to run. He blindly moves through the darkness trying to find Zann, which is a nice thought to rescue him because I feel like most people would just turn, run, and save themselves. While looking for Zann, the narrator feels something pass by him. He can't see it, but he describes it as a chill thing. So not only does this terrible black void of chaos exist, something came out of it. Now, obviously, the narrator had to have rolled pretty high on his sanity check because this is another instance where you would have to roll. Not only did you witness something so terrible and beyond your imagining or comprehension, something came out of it and it is now freely moving throughout the room. Which begs the question, why didn't the narrator get grabbed? This, in my opinion, is because of Zann. Because all while this is happening and occurring, Zann is still frantically playing the music. And because it was specifically mentioned that his music sounded like it was drowning out the other sounds or keeping things outside at bay, I believe that Zann's continuing of the music is what saved the narrator. The narrator does try to scream for Zann, but when he gets no response, he physically tries to move him where he realizes that he's dead and that his body is just continuing to play the music even though he's no longer alive, which is a horrifying thought and concept. With nothing left holding him back, the narrator then just bolts out of the room, out of the house, out of the street, and the neighborhood totally. And this is where the narrator realizes that there is no darkness nor storm raging above him. The sky is completely calm and quiet, and all he can see are the city lights in the background. The narrator then goes on to say that, his description of these events actually happened years ago and he's just recalling what happened. He does try to investigate the Rue d'Orsay, however, he's met with a huge mystery. Not only does the Rue d'Orsay not appear on any map, but he can't find anyone who has ever lived there or had any memory of the building. The narrator's only relief from the situation is that not only can he not find the building, it means that other people can't find it either. So whatever the Rue d'Orsay was, that window, that black void, if he can't find it or get to it, hopefully that means others can't be affected by it as well. He also states that he's glad that the papers of Erich Zann are gone, the papers that explain everything, which to me sounds like he's perfectly content not understanding what happened. The events that he endured were enough to scar his sanity forever, and just further understanding or investigating that what happened would only push him past a breaking point. What I love about the ending is that it starts to paint the perfect picture of someone succumbing to madness. Because what happened to the narrator? If someone were to tell you that story on the street, you would think they're completely nuts. A musician was playing music that could beat back the dark void of space, that his dead body continued to play even though he was long gone, that the building itself is no longer around, no one can find it, it never existed. You'd be like, yeah, sure thing, and then instantly call 911 asking for help. The ability to perfectly capture someone undergoing madness is what separates Lovecraftian horror away from other horror, in my opinion. And the best way to do that is to mess with time and space. Another great example of this is if you watch the movie At the Mouth of Madness, when John Trent returns from Hobbs End. Even though he just arrives back to the city, it's described that he actually came back months ago and turned over the manuscript for Sutter Kane, something that he sought to utterly destroy. Not only that, but his partner Linda never existed and that he went to Hobbs End completely on his own. When you begin to mess with time and space, you begin to alter people's perception of reality. And doubting your own reality is the first steps of cracking your sanity. That same feeling when you're walking out on a frozen lake or a puddle and you take that step and you hear the glass crack and begin to splinter. You know and realize that there's no coming back from that. The narrator at the end of Erich Zann, in my opinion, chooses to live in ignorance. He doesn't want to know more about the Rue d'Orsay. He doesn't want to know about Erich Zann or his music. He just lived and endured an impossible event that brought him face to face with cosmic horrors. Not only that, but the place that he stayed and the people he met potentially never existed, or if they did exist, have been wiped out of space and time. So his choices are, at this point, to cling to whatever reality and sanity he has left, and by doing so, not investigating what happened further and just living in denial/ignorance, or to press on, figure out what happened, and potentially never come back. Now, that decision is entirely up to you, because I feel that some people would want to investigate further, like once that can of worms is open, that Pandora's box, they wouldn't be able to close it. Or some people would choose the latter option, like that guy from The Matrix who willingly chooses to go back in. He betrays Morpheus and Neo in an attempt to get plugged back in and never know what this true reality is. And that, in my opinion, is the narrator's choice. So what happened to the Rue d'Orsay? We never know. It's never really further investigated or talked about. But I do have my own personal theories on what happened. I believe that Zann's music was meant to keep whatever cosmic horror out beyond the window at bay. And seeing how it was able to smash the window, aka most likely a portal into our dimension, in an attempt to take Zann and his explanation of things, I do believe what was beyond that window had come for Zann and everything associated with him. Kind of like how Lovecraft wrote about the mad Arab Abdul Azared and how he wrote the Necronomicon. After he completed his work, the Old Ones came for him and he was unalived in broad daylight. I believe that this was Zann's fate as well as the Rue d'Orsay and any of the tenants that remained in the building. That on that fateful night, that cosmic horror came for Zann, his music, his viol, and anyone who knew too much. But not just the location. Like with all powers beyond human comprehension, the entity also removed the Rue d'Orsay from time and history itself, which is why nobody remembers the building. No one remembers living there nor staying there, which is a terrifying thought that fits well within the scope of Lovecraftian horror. But that is it. That is the music of Erich Zann. So I hope that me nerding out over the story helped you gain a new perspective or new appreciation for the story or the horror that lies within. I mixed things up this time and came up with the Eldritch Soup talks first, and then the narration will drop within like 2 or 3 weeks. Reason one is I'm still recording and editing the narration, but the second reason is just what I mentioned. If you're somebody that has heard or read the story before, I hope me diving into this would give you like a new viewpoint or appreciation for the story. And if you're somebody that has never dove into Lovecraftian horror before and you're just reading the music of Erich Zann, that your takeaway from the story isn't just ooh scary void or ooh scary music, that there's a lot more subtle horror that lies within the pages. As always, thank you for listening. Whether you're on Spotify or YouTube, definitely hit that subscribe button because we got a ton of good content coming out. I already have the narration and Eldritch Soup Talk podcast about Cool Air up now you can check out. And then, like I said, I have the music of Erich Zann narration coming out within the next couple weeks. So what's next for Eldritch Soup Talks and narration? It's another very short but sleeper story called The Terrible Old Man. This story is like the polar opposite of Cool Air, which is why I wanted to dive into it next to do a nice compare and contrast between the two stories. But that story is next on my list, so stay tuned for more.